Andy Reid. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. How are you?
I am very good. I will be all the better in about a week when I submit my PhD finally.
How long's that taking you?
Yeah, 4 years.
That's a long time.
But I've had a bit of a false start because I started doing it in something else, and then that for certain reasons didn't happen. So I then started again. So I've got a mate of mine who goes, "Fucking hell, you've been doing a PhD forever."
Seems to be the way, right, with that PhD carry on. I mean, look, it's far too educated for me, for the likes of little old me. But for the consistency, the persistence, I think you should get one just for persisting with it, man. It's so impressive to see people that have just got the resolve to survive it, right? It's very impressive.
Well, often, people take long time. I know people's taken 7, 8 years, but now unis used to be quite happy with that. But now I think there's pressure, a lot of pressure to finish on time. And I think the government has tied funding to that, which then drives behavior.
Of course.
So
of course.
I officially have a month left. But I want to get it in before then.
Sure.
Mate, we're not here to talk about my PhD. We're here to talk about you and your book. But before we get into that, we were just chatting beforehand. We were both dragged here, kicking and screaming by our better halves, right?
Yeah, clearly against our will. Clearly.
Yes. And held here against our will.
Oh, big time.
But Jesus, Blighty's having a bit of a shocker at the minute, isn't it?
Honestly, man, I'm so glad to be this far away, to be honest. I went back in July to visit family. I had a grandparent that sort of had run her time in the sun and passed away. And I don't get attached to places that much, but when I went home and walked around where I was brought up and where I grew up, played football as a kid or soccer in Australia as a kid, in the local park and that, to see the state that it's gotten to, I just could feel myself getting tangibly upset. It's just, it makes me feel so grateful, even with the ridiculous amounts of traffic that we have to cop here in Melbourne. It still makes me feel so grateful to be here. It makes me feel incredibly grateful to have kids that are getting brought up here as opposed to there. It's never lost on us, right? How lucky we are, really.
Absolutely. And I often say that in workshops, actually, when we talk about gratitude. And I say most immigrants like us who live in Australia are like, fucking hell, this place is just amazing.
Honestly,
when I hear Australians complain, I think to myself, fuck off to a third world country for a year, and then go and live in Britain.
I was about to say, or go visit Derby for a week and see what it's really all about. Western civilization, apparently not.
Indeed, but anyway, let's get back. Now, you've had a wide and varied career. There's a potential suggestion there may be a bit of ADHD going on there, but talk us through.
What do you mean potentially? What do you mean potentially, man? I might as well have it tattooed across my forehead, to be honest.
It's only because I see overtones of myself in there as well. Right?
Yeah.
So talk us through your career, and then we will start to talk about the book and your podcast.
Yeah, sure. So I originally engineering educated. So I've got a degree in mechanical and manufacturing engineering, but it was boring as batshit. So I decided to get people drunk for a living instead. I made the conscious, not a lot of people fall into hospitality. I actually made the conscious decision to leave engineering and go into hospitality full time. And
wow.
So ran bars and restaurants and big venues. So I let you know before, I was a Newcastle supporter. I actually ran the alcohol side and the drink side of St James's Park for a time, which was incredible.
Oh, really? So just for our listeners, the uneducated, St James's Park is Newcastle United, which is a big football club soccer club for the Aussies, a big one in the UK. It's a massive club actually, and we were talking about this before we come on. They just won their first domestic trophy in over 70 years, and there's been Geordies all around the world in floods of tears.
Me included, man. Me included. I had lots of people in Sydney kind of wondering if I'd had a mental breakdown when I was crying into my porridge or my oats or wherever it was at breakfast in restaurants and things like that. It was an emotional time. But anyway, so yeah, so I ran the bars. I was a bar manager there for a while, and then looked after a couple of hotels. Ran a vodka bar in London, and then like yourself, man, met an Australian lady who swindled me over here, kicking and screaming, and fell in love with Melbourne, fell in love with Australia. Her father was a director of a real estate firm, so I was actually in the process of getting sponsored by a telecommunications firm, but he said, "Look, I think you'd be good in real estate," and that was over dinner. So I said, "All right, well, if I'm shit, bin me, and there'll be no hard feelings." And discovered quite quickly. I say quite quickly. It took a little while, but eventually discovered that um, life can be really easy if you're just true to who you are. And so off the back of that, I ended up being quite successful in the real estate space, sort of selling 60 to 90 homes a year and going really quite well. But then fell in love with the craft of auctioneering. And again, my father-in-law, my former father-in-law, who I owe a lot to, threw me into an auction as the auctioneer with 2 weeks' notice, and it became an addiction straight away. Not for the attention, but just for the freedom that the pressure brought into my mind. It was just that spot, the nowhere to hide, complete spontaneity situation that I just fell in love with it, and off the back of that, became obsessed with the craft of auctioneering. In 2017, started my own auctioneering business, which is still running today. I do between sort of 400 to 500 auctions a year in Melbourne, real estate auctions, that is,
Wow.
property auctions. Statistically, one of the most active auctioneers in Melbourne. In 2022, was fortunate enough to be named the number one auctioneer in Australia, which big mouth,
Wow.
mate, big mouth and an accent. It covers all sorts of inadequacies. It really, really does. Hence,
You've just summed up my career in
yeah,
Australia.
essentially, mate. Like, honestly, if people actually paid attention to what it is that I said, I'd have very little credibility, I think. So, but the accent just lets me get away with all sorts, which is so much fun. Yeah, so 2022 was fortunate enough to win that. I've been into sales and coaching and whatnot. Originally, I didn't want to, because I came out of real estate sales because my auctioneering business sort of really kicked on. And and then in 2020, actually, ironically, when I couldn't do any auctions, my career really
Mm.
sort of kicked on, because it was a couple of days after Mr. Morrison locked us all away in Melbourne in the March, when I just woke up at 2:30 in the morning and said to my then wife, it's probably one of the reasons why she's not my wife anymore. Woke up at 2:30 in the morning and woke her up and just said, "Look, I've got to do a live show." And then I created this little show during COVID called The Silver Lining, which had a purpose of maintaining connection in a disconnected society, and just did live interviews 3 times a day, 7 days a week, and yeah, and then
Wow.
yeah, which was interesting when I had to go back to England not long after I decided to kick off with it for some family reasons. So I was doing it in different time zone for a little while as well. And yeah, and off the back of that, just gained a whole bunch of notoriety within the real estate space. And as a result, went into the coaching side, was a national head of training for a major franchise group across Australia and New Zealand for a couple of years. And now I run a podcast and help people to help make success more accessible for more humans. That's my whole purpose for being. And I'm very, very fortunate that off the back of my hospitality, my engineering, my real estate, my sales, my networking career, it's just all sort of come together and helped me to help a load of people, which is really cool. Find myself to be really fortunate.
Very cool. And you've now written a book
Yeah.
And we actually share a publisher who's awesome, Leslie.
Yes.
And your book is Success Curious.
Yeah.
So why the focus? And you've got a podcast called High Performance People.
Mm.
Why the focus on success and high performance?
Because what I've discovered, especially over the last couple of years, but it really has come into a massive focus when this whole book writing process came into being. And the podcast as well. I've really discovered that the majority of the world really has a problem with the whole concept and feeling of success, because it's not, I don't blame social media. I blame the way in which humans are using social media, in the way that this human highlight reel, but it's really created a chasm between the haves and the perceived have-nots, and
Right.
and the perception of success is becoming so bastardized, for want of a better word, to the point where someone needs to try and simplify all of this for people, right? And that's what I've decided to try and take on. Um, Whenever you look at things like personal development and professional development courses and all these things, you get rich quick courses and all that sort of jazz that you see bandied around all the time. And even when you look at some incredible literature, like, really world renowned literature, your 4 hour work weeks, your atomic habits, all those sorts of things, all those books, all your Tony Robbins stuff. For a lot of people, they get inspired for a very short period of time and then they just sort
Yeah.
of drift back to the norm. And I don't think that it's necessarily their fault. I feel that the information hasn't been made to feel relatable enough to individuals. Or if you look at it the other way, I don't feel that individuals have been given the knowledge and the awareness and the artillery to be able to consume any personal development information in a way that befits their life. So, so this Success Curious book that I put together, which was harder than climbing a mountain for someone who is riddled with ADHD. It was so difficult, and God knows how you're doing it with a PhD. Like I no idea. I just feel that, because at first I was always trying to be a thought leader. This whole thought and this notion of being a thought leader, man, it used to do my head in, because I'm like, I believe that I'm intelligent. I believe that I can simplify things in a really good way for people that they can understand and consume. But I had no original ideas. Like the ideas that I came up with, it was a little bit like there's a million people that came up with Uber before Uber came up with Uber, right? And I was one of them.
Yeah.
And it used to put a chip on my shoulder, where now I've discovered my purpose for being on this planet is not to be the person that sings a brand new idea from the rooftops, because I haven't got enough of an ego to be able to do that. But I'm the guy that's got enough brain power to be able to make it feasible for people to understand.
That's a very interesting that you say that, right? Because I call myself a pracademic, which means that I like to read all the geeky academic research and then turn it into tools and solutions that normal people can use on a daily basis. And my space just happens to be around the resilience and hardiness and well-being space, right? But very interesting, some of your observations, because that whole drive to be a thought leader and to come up with original stuff, right? But then you realize that a lot of the, in inverted commas, thought leaders are just reparroting other people's stuff and often not crediting them with it, right?
Big time.
And that pisses me off, because I will always reference people in my talks. Part of that is having that academic background, right? Where you say this person and then you interpret it, right? But the amount of people, particularly influencers in my space, that I see talking about concepts that are clearly from someone else, but having complete ownership of those concepts, is just, and it really infuriates me, because I'm like, you've just ripped that person right off, given them no credit whatsoever, and you're building yourself up on a lie.
Oh,
Right?
it's mad, man. And you could take it a couple of steps further and argue that the poor ancient Greek Stoics and philosophers would be turning in their graves if they saw how many
Mm.
people were commoditizing their stuff, right? Like realistically, right? You look at your Aristotles, your Platos, your Senecas, and all those insanely intelligent minds that are just being translated and put into something that's got some sexy packaging around it, and then fed out there for the masses to consume. It's just I couldn't agree with you more. I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't do it intentionally at first. It was just something that I did. I just like to give people their flowers, right? To quote a modern day sort of parlance, like Rick Rushton, who's one of my mentors, he was my original mentor. Like I talk about him in the book more. I talk about some of my stories, and he's like the second most mentioned person in my book because of what he's taught me. And I know, and when he's taught me, he's been telling me about the fact that Jim Rohn was his mentor, right?
Yeah.
And he references Jim Rohn's stuff, and he always credits you back to Jim Rohn. So I guess he sort of conditioned me to do that, and I refer to myself as one of his disciples, right? And I'm happy to be. I'm
Yeah.
happy to be because realistically, man, there's could you argue that there's no such thing as an original idea? Could you argue that now?
Yeah, that is a very interesting concept, right? Because there's so much stuff that people come up with that has been thought about before. Because and particularly in that space of psychology,
Mm,
psychology, well-being, that whole space. Like people come up with stuff. Actually, cognitive behavior therapy
yep.
to take a point, right, which is one of the third wave therapies and a pretty successful one.
Mm,
But when you look at the origins of cognitive behavior therapy, it was created by Ellis and Beck in the 50s and the 60s.
hmm.
And a lot of it was based on Stoic philosophy, right?
Big
We have the
time.
Stoics popping up again, right?
Mm.
But again, not credited to the Stoics, right? Which is the little thing that annoys me. But um, let's circle back into your book. And so with that success curious, is there anything, I'm sure there are lots of things, right? But the stuff that you have noticed, consistent traits of successful people or habits or behaviors that seem to be reasonably consistent that normal human beings can take and run with.
Well, the cereal box answer for that is consistency and hard work and all those sorts of. Like I said,
Yeah.
I refer to them as cereal box words. You get a free gift in a box of cereal, right? And it's generally one of them. Um, the one trait that screams out to me, and it's been a lot of the time, it's been with the podcast as well, is that successful human beings, they know who they are, like to their DNA. Like they know exactly who they are, and they are comfortable with who they are, right?
Mm.
And it kind of relates to something, a theory that I love. I fell in love with when I did some research around it for the book. It's called self-determination theory, and
Oh, by Jackie and Ryan. The
ah,
second the second guest on my podcast was Professor Richard Ryan.
you're
And
joking.
I kid you not, and I disclosed on air that I have a man crush on him because I've read so much stuff about it's like self-determination theory has massively influenced me personally, but a lot of the work that I do with people. Anyway,
Oh,
that's just a little aside, right?
yeah,
But
but
and
that
and and brilliant, absolutely brilliant guy. I was very lucky to do a 4-hour workshop with him
that's so
in Sydney,
cool.
and managed to get a photograph with him afterwards, which I'm very proud. But he was great on the podcast.
Oh, that is
I'm
so
very
cool, man.
very happy to come on the podcast.
That is so cool. Well, so the way that I've sort of related it to or interpreted it to the people that I've met is that the autonomy piece and the competence piece are
Yeah.
pretty straightforward. It's
Yeah.
that third element. It's that
Mm.
relatedness that a lot of people, as
Yeah.
far as what I can see, have really can't manage to get, or they don't manage to achieve. They don't manage to understand and realize, right? Because I think that, and I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that the world has become so noisy that people are being influenced by all sorts of different things so much of the time, and you could and it's becoming so apparent now that your Gen Zs and your Gen Alphas, they're really struggling to discover their own identity because there's so much noise that they're not able
Yeah.
to create the space around themselves to figure out who the hell they are. And and a lot of that boils down to the fact that people talk about values ad nauseum, and you see it, and especially in the corporate landscape, where, like I said,
Mm.
values are seen as sales pitches as opposed to DNA understanding of as to who one is and how one rolls. And I
Yes.
feel that the people that are genuinely successful, they are successful because of the fact that they know to the core who the hell they are.
I
And
think the word that jumps into my mind when you were talking about that is authenticity. And I think people can smell authenticity, and they can smell when people are being inauthentic after, sometimes after a while.
yeah, yeah.
But I do agree with you that the people who are really successful, like, they are authentic. They know who they are, and they behave in a way that's consistent with that.
Yeah, and but that you said that you can smell authenticity. Like, I personally feel that that term has been completely ripped to shreds by the corporate landscape, and because a lot of people have now turned that into something that they sell. Like, if you are authentic, then by definition, you should not need to sell it. It's a bit like, in a sales analogy, right? It's a bit like the challenge between confidence and convincing, right?
Hmm.
So if you're not being authentic, then you feel that you have to convince people of who you are, what you're about, your wares, if
Yeah.
you're selling or whatever. I actually said this in a talk yesterday in Adelaide, that I actually believe that if you are confident in who you are, right, ergo authentic in who you are, then you should never need to convince anyone about anything, because it just is. It's a statement of fact, right? And in the real estate space, which is inherently one of the least trusted professions in the
Yes.
world, right? And by reputation, one of the least authentic. I actually found it to be very, very easy because I didn't have to make an excuse as to who I was. I was who I was, and just by
Mm.
doing that, and again, it wasn't by any major level of intention. I just did it because it seemed to work. People couldn't question me because it was just so obvious that I was just being who I was, and I happened to have the information that helped people to make a step forward. Right?
And I think that that plays into relatedness, right?
Oh, big
You'll
time.
see and especially I think in any sales environment, people who naturally relate to others and can build relationships and rapport with others naturally tend to do very, very well in sales environments because it's not forced,
Yeah.
right? It is more, it's authentic rather than forced or created. And again, you can fucking smell that. You know what I love is when I'm talking to, and I've done this with real estate agents and other salespeople, is that I'll just notice that they're starting to mimic my body language, and then I'll start to fuck around with it, right?
You
So
start picking your nose and stuff.
yeah, I'll sort of cross my arms and then stand a certain way, and then just watch them do it, and then move it around. And I'm just thinking, you fucking dodgy bastards! I know
Oh
what you're
man.
at.
Honestly, that's just a complete misunderstanding of basically CBT, right? And NLP. It just Yeah, they learn it. Like I said, they learn it off the back of a cereal box and think that that's how it's
Correct.
done, and without really understanding what it's about. And the problem is when it comes to sales based industries, is that because unfortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, the one true barometer for success is financial gain, right? It's commission, right? That's the only realistic barometer for success in a sales position is ultimately, have you sold enough, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that creates so much fear that they fear being who they are, because if they are who they are, then they're concerned that people are going to judge them for who they are, and as a result of that, not give them the business. It was really interesting when COVID. I hate referring back to it, but it's a really significant point when we think about how our identities are attached to our jobs and our roles.
Mm.
When the lockdown officially started, or officially kicked into gear, I was on the phone till like 3 a.m. with real estate agents who, until that point, you would have thought they were made of Teflon, right? Because nothing stuck, right? They were smooth as silk. And they were calling me in a panic because all of a sudden they had their identities ripped away from them,
Yeah.
right? And it made it it made a very, very interesting dynamic out of nowhere, where all of a sudden everyone's going, shit, I don't know who I am. And it was
Mm.
really interesting. So, and that's sort of actually, that's where the idea of the book actually started. The seed was planted at in that sort of 3 a.m. in the morning, when I'm having this conversation constantly with agent after agent after agent saying, Andy, like, what do we do? How do we? And it wasn't a case of what do we do in terms of logistics. It was like, what do I do with myself? Like, what am I supposed to, like? And it was just so weird. Some of these people that you'd thought were emotionless that were crying down the phone,
Mm.
right? Very, very strange. Very, very strange. So, yeah. So that's essentially some elements of the book that I really sort of like to dig into. And what I've discovered, having written it, is because of where I like to see myself. Much like yourself in the work that you do. Um, it's been it's been really cool. The book's sort of been described as the precursor to any personal development that anyone wants to do. And it sort of gives people that extra degree of a foundation that allows them to actually understand who the hell they are before they go windmilling into any of this personal development stuff.
I want to take this conversation in a way, in a place that I didn't think that I was going to take this conversation, right? But
Cool.
I'm going to talk about religion, right? Now,
Nice.
um, with the backdrop of I am a self-confessed recovering Catholic
Right.
who's been in recovery for 30 years, right? And 40 years actually I've been in recovery, but and I'm not a fan of religion. No, actually, let me qualify that. I'm not a fan of religious institutions,
Okay.
right? But I would say, and I've been thinking about this more and more, and this existential vacuum that seems to be accelerating around us, and with people with loss of meaning and purpose, and just
Mm-hmm.
doing a number of workshops in the last couple of weeks, and on the topic of meaning and purpose, and asking people, who has a clearly defined sense of meaning and purpose in their lives, and just how little hands actually go up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I actually think, and again, this is not my idea, but I can't remember where I read it, but it was quite recently, and I actually agree with it, that the breakdown of religion has actually caused this existential vacuum. And so let me add some color to that. And what I mean by that is that, when you were a kid, I don't know if you went to church at all, whether there was
Yeah.
any religion, but I remember going to church, right? And you'd sit and listen to the gospel or whatever it may be, whatever your church is. But what all organized religions do is there's a number of things. So number one, they give a sense of hope, right? But they also give a set of values
Mm-hmm.
for people, and a guide for how to behave,
Mm-hmm.
and a sense of collective identity,
Mm-hmm.
which can be very, very powerful, right? And my younger brother is still religious, and it's that it is actually drawing him in, not so much. And some people will talk about that, but when you take that away, when people are and look, there's a fair amount, particularly with Catholicism, of fear and brimstone and all of that sort of stuff. But let's keep that out of it.
Let's keep it. Let's not go that heavy with all that carry on, right?
No,
Let's
no,
not start
exactly.
talking apocalypse anytime soon.
But for me, the positives of any organized religion are that sense of collective identity and giving people's values for how to behave, right? And then that people then will tend to behave like that, a lot of them. And but then you take that away, and what that does is that's created an existential vacuum that people now have to do the work to think about, who am I? What sort of a person do I want to be? What are my values? What do I want to be known for? And just with the work that I do, there's so many people who those questions are actually quite foreign to them.
Oh,
They actually haven't sat down and given that any thought. And then, sorry, and I will throw over to you, to then play it back to social media, in that existential vacuum, people get hooked into these sets of values, whether it's, you see this playing out in the United States, Republicans versus Democrats now, and we see a lot of young men now being sucked into the world of Andrew Tate and stuff like that because they don't have that other sense of identity. And then they get sucked in, and then they get given a set of values through osmosis, almost through social media and the echo chamber. Commentary on that.
It's such a good topic. I love this. So I'll start with a little story. So my daughter, who's 10, and is scarily emotionally intelligent for 10, right? And as a single dad, it does make me nervous for various reasons. And she asked me one time, because she goes to a Christian school, and she's really into science. She likes asking me stuff about space and all this sort of jazz, right? And she goes, Dad, and I says, yeah. And she goes, at the Big Bang, we were talking about the Big Bang Theory. And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, so was it the Big Bang Theory that created the Earth, or was it God? Right? And I went, that's a bloody interesting question, that kid. And I said, and I love having these conversations. She's amazing. She's such a good human. And I said, well, realistically, darling, it all boils down to the word faith. And she goes, what do you mean? And I said, because whether it is God that you have faith in, or whether it is science that you have faith in, ultimately, every sort of belief system, whether it's science, religion, whatever, it all starts with an element of faith, right? Science has got proof to a certain point, but then ultimately all proof is formed on theory, right? And in order to form a theory, you have to have faith in something before you can form a theory, right? So
and with science, proof is not absolute. There's confidence levels.
Exactly. How many things did we believe in until it was proved otherwise, right?
Yeah.
So everything. So I said, look, irrespective of whether you go down the science track or whether you go down the Bible track or whatever the case may be, ultimately, the beautiful thing is that you get to select your own faith, what your faith is. But one of the things that makes us inherently human is the ability to have faith in something, whatever that thing may be. Now, when you talk about lack of identity and lack of purpose, the example that I've been giving has been, there's been an increasing volume of protests going on in the world, right? And take the Palestine protests. Now, I am confident and I'm hopeful and I have optimism in society that a lot of the people that do these protests are all very, very well intentioned, right? But because they've, like you said, because they've really struggled to form their own identity, they are hooking themselves into the identity of being part of a pack, right? Which is an inherently human thing. And like I said, I like to think that they've all got the best intentions for it. However, if you were to take a map of the world into a group of Palestinian protesters and ask them to point out where Palestine is on a map, they couldn't tell you. They would not be able to tell you where the Gaza Strip is on a world map, right? And my point that I'm making with that is the fact that, like you said, we as leaders, as people, not thought leaders, but as people that are comfortable enough to own their universe and own who they are and own their position in the world and what have you, and their map of the world, we have a real responsibility, a massive level of accountability to help people to understand their own identity in the world. And if we don't, and if we just accept that people are who they are, then we've only got ourselves to blame, really, as leaders. Now, you can say that you can't change the world as one person. No, you're right. But there are enough people that do know and own who they are to be able to make some sort of a dent in the way that the world's going. But the problem is the fact that at the minute, a lot of us, if we're being honest, we're really sitting on the sidelines, because ultimately we are human beings and we see people that do try and make a difference get shot down via a million, Andrew Tate supporters who are all up for toxic masculinity and all that sort of jazz, right? All the big, loud, shouty people.
Yeah.
And I just feel that, like, your kids are the best teachers sometimes. And when Eliza was questioning that, and I mentioned the fact that you get to pick your faith, as long as you've got faith in something, you'll be sweet as a nut, right? Whatever that faith is. And she just sat back in a chair, because we're in the car on the way back from school. And she just sat back in a chair and she went, so I can believe in God and science? And I went, of course you can. Of course you can. And that's the beautiful thing about being human, is the fact that you don't have to. Yes, religion has helped people to stay on the straight and narrow, depending on your map of the world, right? Because there's certain religions that people think send you down the wrong path, depending on your orientation. But in a world that has got so much noise and so much choice, and I think we're paralyzed by choice these days, right? Whereas back in the day, you had the good book, and that was about all you had, right? Because you didn't have TVs and stuff. So I think that I think that the topic of faith needs to be discussed, but it needs to be discussed in a holistic way where it's not just religion.
Context, yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yes, no, I totally agree, and that you can do this and this, right? So just to come back to, and we're walking a political tightrope here, but the whole Palestine thing, it's really interesting, because I make a point of, when I read the news or go online, I will go on to the Australian, which is quite right wing, and I will then go on to the Guardian, which is left wing, and I always do that, right? And I'll be on CNN, I'll go to Al Jazeera, or I'll go to Fox News, just to fucking see how different the world is. Right?
Oh yeah,
but for me, it's like, you read the Australian, guarantee you go back almost every single day, there's something about anti-Semitism. And then you go on to the Guardian, and almost every single day, it's about what's happening to the Palestinians. When did it ever become that your political leanings determined which group that you could have empathy for? Why can't we go, fucking hell, those attacks that Hamas did were horrendous, and have massive empathy for them, and at the same time have massive empathy for the Palestinian people and all the suffering that's actually happening because of that? Like, why is everything, and this is my point about the world, with that existential vacuum, and with social media and us becoming more and more polarized around this, that it almost has to be, hey, if this is your political leaning, this is what you have to believe, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're in the United States and you're a Republican, you have to believe that you shouldn't be supporting the Ukraine war, and that all of a sudden fucking Putin is not the horrendous fucking individual that he is.
Yeah, man. Oh, look.
But it's just, for me, but it comes back to this conversation that you were talking about about knowing thyself, and was inscribed in the oracle at Delphi.
Yeah.
Know thyself, right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. So in your book, or the stuff that you've come across, what are some tips that you think that people could do for that self-exploration, to know thyself?
One of the first things that we should do, that worked really well for me, was when I had a bit of an identity crisis. It was a couple of days after my old man passed away, and I did an exercise around values, right, where there was like a huge, however many hundreds of values, and it took me hours to whittle it down to sort of three or four. I whittled it down to three. Um, and every round, your job is to cut out half of the values that are on that list, right?
Yeah, nice,
And
nice.
and the three so beforehand, the ones that I had involved things like ambition and determination and all this sort of crap. The three that I came up with when I was in a very vulnerable space, having just lost my old man, were connection, fun, and simplicity, right? Which is not very corporate.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that I've been saying to people is that if you put your values on a line, on a bit of paper, um, the exercise that you need to do, that I think works quite well, is put your values on one line and then put five or so other sets of values on lines above and below, and go a bit usual suspects, right? And go to your loved ones and see if they can pick out which one is you, right?
Ah, nice. Okay,
Because
I like it.
if you do that, and your loved ones, the people that truly know who you are, can't pick you out, then you got to question whether they're your values.
Yeah, or whether they're just things that you would like to have as your values. That
Exactly. They're
you
yeah,
think.
exactly. They're the projection of where you would love to be, but they are
Yeah,
not who
and
you
that,
are now.
or where you think you should be, right?
Totally,
The
100%,
the tyranny of the shoulds, right?
100%.
And so, mate, now that we are into this existential conversation, right,
Yes.
around values and stuff.
Who'd have thought this? People of our accents are using the word existential. Seriously. Like our old schoolmates would be like going, "Who are these two?"
I was just about to say, if my mates from Belfast come on, they'd be going, "What the fuck are you on about, you
Oh,
tit?"
yeah, stop talking some foreign language. Speak in English, please.
But anyway, so the ultimate existential question I'm going to throw at you is, and I know you talk about this in your book, is why do you exist?
I exist to make success more accessible. I exist because I'm good at making things simple for people, right? I exist because I have a purpose. My reason for being is my DNA is to make people feel that success can exist in their lives. And I know that sounds at the cold face of it, it sounds very corporate and it sounds very white collar. The whole notion of success does feel very white collar, but success for me is applicable to any element of your life, right? So for someone, success might be defined by the way that their kids end up, right? It could be defined
Yeah,
by their parenting. It could be defined by their health. It could be defined by their spirituality. Success for someone, talk religion, success for someone could be to be absolute in their behaviors around the Ten Commandments, for example, right?
yeah, yeah.
Or talk, you know what I mean? So it's success holds so many forms, and my purpose, my reason for being, is to help people to get cool with that and to actually go follow how success is defined for them. No, I can't change the world, but I can change the world for one person potentially. And if we were
Mm,
all to own who we were and to own what success looks like for us, because success, from the iteration of success going back to Rome and Greece and whatnot, is the definition of original derivative was to progress, right? And I think a lot of humans that get upset, cranky, and end up kicking off is because they don't feel like they're moving forward in life. So therefore, they have to make a lot of noise in order to be heard, in order to move forward. Whether that is through because they're feeling oppressed, because they're a people or they're a sect or whatever it is, right? So that's my. I mean, it's taken me a long time to get there, right? I was really struggling with that for a long time. I have to say, but
Very interesting. So I'll tell you, given that I've asked you the question, I will give you my tombstone statement, right?
nice.
Which and I do this in workshops. I get people to write a tombstone statement, and mine, excuse me, is military man turned educator to help others be better versions of themselves, right?
Amazing.
And look, that actually came from a a pretty negative event where 8 friends of mine got killed in a helicopter crash. Two very, very good mates. But the point was that then set me on a path that ended up with this. But it's only about thinking about it that it actually comes. That as I often say to people, there is no purpose fairy. There's no fairy that's going to come along and give you the purpose, and you have to think about this. But I tell you, there's a quote that I came across that I now use in workshops to set this up because I think it's brilliant. And it's from Seneca, the Stoic philosopher. And you mentioned the Stoic. You started this shit. Everybody who listens to my podcast goes, fucking hell, he's going to talk about the Stoics again. But you started it.
I did.
Unprompted, right? But it's Seneca, and he said, every individual bears the responsibility to be of value to humanity.
Yep.
If possible, to benefit a large number, if not, to benefit a smaller group. And if that too seems unattainable, then to benefit their immediate community. But above all else, they must prioritize self-growth and personal well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I love that is that it just simplifies it. It's the stuff that you talked about. It's not about fucking having a success. It's not about being a multimillionaire, creating this startup and running an orphanage in Nepal at the same time.
Yep.
It's just about how can you affect your little corner of the universe. But the thing that I love that Seneca brings to it is that you must prioritize your self-growth and personal well-being, because if you sort your own shit out and are healthy, then you're going to be much more able to deliver that benefit to other people.
Absolutely, man. And I actually had this battle when it came to being a parent, because I really struggled to set boundaries with my kids because I felt that I wasn't allowed. I didn't think I was allowed to. I thought my kids should have complete 100% unadulterated access to me. And it was only when I finally realized that I needed to set a boundary around my physical exercise that allowed me to feel so much more free to be a parent in the best way I possibly could be. Because they know now for the 30 minutes or 45 minutes that I'm doing a workout in my garage or whatever, we've got an agreement like that is the one time where, unless someone's arm's falling off, if it's a debate over the bloody TV remote, then they're not to bother me.
Blood.
Exactly.
Blood, right?
Exactly.
There's no blood involved. Do not interrupt.
Exactly. If there's blood or no breathing, then you're allowed.
Love it. Okay, mate. So another big question I'm going to ask you, the last big question.
Cool.
Because you also talk about this, is what broke you?
Yeah, man. You know what? And I was actually thinking about it then when you mentioned about your 8 colleagues and friends who died in a helicopter accident before. And it's shit, right? That a lot of the best versions of people are made through trauma.
Yeah,
it's always been something that really annoys me, and I'm like, fuck, how can we get around this? Is there any way of us as human beings is there any way of us being able to get around this whole thing of we have to suffer trauma in order to become more evolved and better versions of ourselves, right? Now, the thing that broke me was the realization that I wasn't the perfect dad that I thought I was going to be. And that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, because I've been sort of existing on the conveyor belt of life without really understanding who I was. And I just turned 30. And when my daughter recently turned 30 when my daughter was born. And a few months after that, when this automatic love that I've got told I was supposed to feel for this kid and all this sort of stuff just wasn't there. I thought that was, what was the point? Like, if I can't even love my own child, what's the point? Like, what's the point of
Mm.
existing? And that started a chain reaction from a mental, I refer to it as my trip down mental health lane, which is 10 years. In a week's time, it will be 10 years since I started on that trip, of understanding that in order to evolve, you have to become a student of yourself. Because if you don't become a student of yourself, and it relates to what you said before, what Seneca said, if you're not a student, if you can't be a student of yourself, then you can never learn. You can never learn the things that are going to help you become a better person, right? And so the thing that broke me was that realization that the life that I was living was not the life I was designed to have, and that was a massive kick in the pills, man. And it took me on a trip that nearly resulted in me, staring at my own mortality a couple of times, and going through various upsets and whatnot. But always refer to it as the best bad thing that's ever happened to me.
I love that term.
Right? The best bad thing that's ever happened to me. Now, would I wish it on anyone else? No. And will I continue to try and figure out how to help people have this evolution without having to go through the shit? Of course, I'm going to keep trying. But as we've both pointed out over the course of this conversation, inevitably something has to test you to an extreme in order for the diamond to come out of the pressure, right? and
Yeah.
and which is shit, but none of us have been able to work out how we can avoid it. So yeah, man, that's the thing that broke me, was when I realized that I wasn't the dad. I genuinely felt that was the thing that I was designed to do. And that was the
Mm.
one thing that I was essentially, if I'm being honest with myself, it was the one thing that I was clinging on to in life, was the fact that, right, at least I know I'm going to be a good dad. When the kid turns up, at least I know I'm going to be a good dad. So when I wasn't, I was like, shit, well, I've got nothing. I've got nothing. And it was a prick of a thing to go through. But I'm grateful that the mother of my kids, who I'm not with anymore, but I have so much respect for, I'm grateful that she had the bottle, the nerve to actually square up to it in me. And if it wasn't for her, I say probably, inevitably, I probably wouldn't still be on the planet having a conversation with you right now. So I owe
Mm.
her a hell of a lot, not just for the kids she's provided for me, but the fact that she gave me the opportunity to continue my existence. And yeah, and that discovery of the fact that I needed to learn who the hell I was at 30 was an interesting realization, but one that I'm ultimately glad I've had.
And how long did it take before you could? And was there a point where you felt that you were turning the corner, or was it just this slow sort of chrysalis? Or did you actually? Was there a few waypoints along the line where you went, actually, I'm on an upwards trajectory and I can feel it and taste it?
It's very cyclical, and it's something that I will always be a student of, because when I was initially going through it, those first few years that I was going through I'd feel like I was going well, and then I would crash and burn, right? And each time I crashed and burned, you know, once I had made it out the other end, and sometimes I nearly didn't. Every single time I learned something new about myself. I discovered a fundamental building block off the back of each
Mm.
one. And as I went through each one, those building blocks sort of grew, and the foundation got stronger, and the mental framework became a lot more structured and solid, and felt more by design as opposed to by default. And
Yeah.
yeah, and then now, like I said, we're nearly a decade into it, and I'm still learning stuff about myself, right? And I always will do. And it's an amazing thing to be able to be aware of that, because it means that while there's always time, in the game of life, there's always chances to score more goals and advance further forward and all the rest of it. But I think it was actually, I think if there was a watershed moment when I sort of took a breath and thought, you know what, you're going all right now. It was after my old man passed away, and the way that I processed the grief was one of immense gratitude as opposed to immense sadness. I was grateful for the dad that I had as opposed to the being sad for the man that I lost. And when that naturally happened, all of a sudden, and once the dust had settled, I was like, you know what? I could have a bit of faith in my own mental framework now. Now's the time for me to now grow as opposed to build from scratch, right? The foundation's looking pretty solid. How can we now make this thing really pop for me?
Awesome.
So yeah, man. So that was it, I guess.
Very cool. So mate, we're no more big, hard, curly questions. What actually, I want to give you what excites you about the future?
The fact that I know I've got so much to learn, but I am very much in control of my own existence now. After the first book, it's weird. After the first book, it felt like I downloaded the first version of myself, and all of a sudden, I had all this space in my brain to think about the second version of myself. Right? It's like I got rid of all the clutter. It's like I'd done a big spring clean, been on a big garage sale, and put it into a book, and now I've got all this space in my brain, which is wonderful. It's fabulous. So that excites me for the future. The direction that my kids are going in, I'm super excited for. Like, they are just two very, very awesome, and I know I'm biased, but they're brilliant individuals in their own right. So I'm very, very lucky that I get to have a very special relationship with them. I know how lucky I am in that respect. And I just feel that it's like I have an opportunity, and we all have opportunities. I know this is going to sound very patronizing. We all have opportunities moving forward, as long as we understand and accept that there is still time in the game of life to be played. Right? I used to have this big problem with satisfaction. I used to be chasing satisfaction and never got there. Right? And Alan Watts, right? By the time you get there, it becomes here. So ergo, there never exists.
Yes.
And once I'd really come to understand that, and it allowed me, and this is one thing I am really working on, is the ability to stay present more often, which, when you have the interesting little bits of wiring that I've got there, it makes it a little bit of a challenge, but I'm really starting to own that. And as soon as I feel like I own the being present, man, the world gets really, really cool. So yeah, man, that's the opportunities to be present more often and with the people that I'm fortunate to have in my life. Lucky
Yeah, that's
boy.
very cool. Yeah. Lucky boy. Yes, aren't we all? Mate, so where can people go to find out more about you and a pracademic's guide to success curious, and somebody who's actually had that lived experience, right? It's not just that you're parroting or re-parroting a whole heap of shit that other people have said on the internet, right? Which is cool. Now, and this is a conversation that went down routes that I was not expecting, but I'm actually very glad that it did. But so where can people go to find more about you, your book, if they want to book you as an auctioneer as
Yeah,
well?
man. Oh, yeah. Well, that's just my like I said,
And have a conversation on the side about existential crises.
which I probably could do while I'm selling a house, to be fair now. But look, andyreid.com.au, that's my site. I'm a very easy guy to find because obviously with the work that I do in auctioneering, I'm a very out there sort of public facing sort of guy. So on Instagram at Andy Reid Coaching, very, very easy guy to hit up there if you want to DM me. The book's available on Amazon. And again, super lucky that it's available in the US, Canada, the UK, about to be available in India as well, which is pretty cool. God help them with some of the words that are in that book. There's going to be some interesting Google searches in India. I'll tell you that for him for nothing. But yeah, man, you're absolutely right. A lot of the book is very self-deprecating. My old man used to say, if you can't laugh at yourself, you shouldn't laugh at anyone else, which I think is a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. Amen. There's my nod to religion. Amen to that. To that one for sure. Andy, this has been awesome. So thank you for making the time to have the conversation, and thank you for being vulnerable enough to share your story with authenticity.
Oh, mate, thank you so much for having me, man. It's an absolute pleasure to be connected to someone that I have as much respect for as yourself. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, thank you. Cheers, mate.